Joining me now, Morgan Griffith, Congressman, Republican, 9th District, Virginia. Lots to talk about today. Congressman, great to have you.
It's great to be with you this morning. And, a sad morning it is. I've already sent a note off to my friend Terry Haney, who was bookkeeper for me at the time, and we were in my office there in Salem, and she called me into her office where she was watching TV, and the first plane had hit, and we were wondering how anybody could make that mistake, and then the second plane hit. And it is a day that so many of the young people don't remember. They weren't old enough to remember it, but it's a day that, for anybody over about 25, it will be in our memories forever. And think about all the people who lost loved ones that day, and the heroes that rushed in to help, the heroes on the airplane that saved the Capitol from being attacked. It was a horrible day for America, but it did show that we can come together and work to defeat a common foe. Well,
do you remember the first thing that you said to your wife, Hillary?
Well, Hillary and I weren't married yet. I was a bachelor at the time, but, I was just in shock that it had happened. I actually left after the second plane hit and before we learned all the other results and drove to the Kmart and bought an American flag kit and put it up on the outside of my building because I knew we were under attack.
That's interesting. And you were in Salem at the time?
I was.
You were in Salem.
I was.
Right. Been there many times, as you know. Well, that's it's everybody remembers where they were if they were old enough to remember, and what their thoughts were, and of course the aftermath of it and everything else. So let's get to politics here. We've got a lot to talk about. Let's start with John Bolton. He's out. What's your take?
President gets to have who he wants. Apparently there was a disagreement over one of the policy issues, and Bolton made that public. Disagreement with the president when you work for him ought to be kept private. I think that's probably what led to the final result. But the bottom line is that, if you're working for the president, you don't agree with him, you tell him, but you don't go tell him in a public way.
I agree with that, and I think that led to that. He had a lot of disagreements with General McMaster, and unlike Bolton, McMaster had, engagements with the press. He had several press conferences in the James Brady room. They had private briefings for invited press members. I was not a fan of McMaster's, but he was very open. But one thing about him, the disputes he had with the president stayed between him and the president. John Bolton, on the other hand, was for John Bolton. And so I'm not a fan of his. I think he was a neocon warmonger, part of the old Republican Guard. And so, quite frankly, I did the happy dance when Trump fired him. Let's get to the Afghanistan meeting with the Taliban. I had an interesting guest yesterday, Congressman, former ambassador of Egypt and Pakistan, Ann Patterson, who was a career diplomat, served under John Kerry as Undersecretary of State. And I love having Patterson on because she really is apolitical. I mean, it's hard to think that she served in a couple of Democratic administrations, but she also served under Republican administrations, and that's what career diplomats do. So she's very refreshing. And there was something she said that I thought about it all day. And she said, if the president had ever met any of these characters in the Taliban, he never would have invited them to Camp David. If he had just met one time, because she said, you meet them and you say to yourself, they're nuts. And I thought that was an interesting thing for a ambassador to say. On the other hand, I mean, I get the president's instincts. Let's meet with all the foes. Let's get a peace treaty together. Let's get Afghanistan government. Let's get the president. Let's get the Taliban. Let's get our troops out of there. What was your take on the setup of the meeting? And then, obviously, he had to cancel it. But do you think going forward with it, sir, was the right thing to do at the beginning?
Well, I think if his timing had been a little different, I don't think meeting with them, the week before 9/11 was really a good timing to do it. Mm-hmm. But I agree with the president's instincts that you want to meet with the people, see if you can bring them together and get something ironed out, because we can't stay in Afghanistan forever. It's not our job. It's not our country. It's one thing when we go in there and we rooted out the Al-Qaeda. We punished the Taliban for having let Al-Qaeda stay there. But it's time, that Afghanistan started making decisions for itself and moving forward. Mm-hmm. Now, they've had a hard time doing that over the centuries. This is not a new problem. It's at least a couple of 100 years old, where the various groups and clans in the various valleys don't get along with one another. But it's time for us to figure out a way out, and the best way to do that is to at least leave a government that is stable in the short run behind, and the way to do that is to bring the two sides together. So I think the president's instincts are right. I would have chosen probably to do it in October instead of September.
I agree with
that. And obviously you can't do it if they're continuing to do terrorist attacks on American soldiers.
Right. So now he says the talks are done, and you really can't blame him for doing that based on what happened. And also, the reality of this is if you can't trust them to go through a weekend before they're coming to Camp David and not blow people up, I don't know how you make a deal with them. And I think that's the president's other position. And I had some people on my show saying, well, it's not really the Taliban, it's their surrogates forcing. It doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter who's driving it. Fact of the matter is they can't control it. And that's sort of the situation. It was like the people telling me in the Gulf that, well, these ships that are being, they're blowing holes in them. It's not really the Iranian central government. It's the rogue commanders. To me, they're one and the same. I mean, if you got commanders blowing up ships or putting the holes in them, I don't know how you turn around and say that's not part of the central government, because that means they can't control their own commanders, right? So it's all the same to me.
I agree.
All right, let's get to USMCA. I'm so frustrated that we can't get USMCA, which is the replacement of NAFTA, on the floor of the House for a vote. And you got a lot of colleagues who ran as moderates, like Abigail Spanberger, Elaine Loria. You see them every day. You say, hi, Abigail. Hi, Elaine. Farmers are suffering. They don't bring it to the floor. There's no pressure on the squad. They're playing political football with it. When you bump into these people in the hall and they're hurting their own constituents, how do you react to that?
Well, they have a decision to make for their constituents, and their constituents can make a judgment a year from now when we get to the elections in 2020. One would hope that we would get some form of the USMCA on the floor so we could make a few amendments to it. There's a couple little glitches in there that I think need to be fixed, but at the same time, the main body of this document needs to move forward. The Canadians and the Mexicans want to have trade with us. They're willing to do a fair deal, a much better deal than NAFTA, which greatly hurt the 9th District of Virginia. And we need that trade, and in fairness, it would give us more ability to deal with the Chinese if we had this one resolved. The bottom line is, I believe the leadership in the House, this is my opinion, the leadership in the House does not want the president to have any victories. They're so concerned about the 2020 election, they're willing to sacrifice jobs, they're willing to sacrifice the well-being of the American people, all about winning an election.
Wow. You really believe that Pelosi will not bring this up, even though she knows that American citizens would greatly benefit from it? Farmers, dairy farmers, timber workers. I mean, I could go down the list for 20 minutes. She'd rather hurt them.
It is my opinion that it will not come up unless she believes it will hurt the Democrats in the 2020 elections if she doesn't bring it up. If she can stonewall it and not have it hurt the Democrats in 2020 in her mind, then it will be stonewalled. We won't bring up a new trade deal.
So that's why
the fact that there's lots of people who stand to benefit from it across the country and across all walks of life.
So isn't that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats playing politics with people's lives?
Well, I don't think there's any question. I mean, look, and I've told this story before, we had some bills that were bipartisan that came out of my Committee of Energy and Commerce. that would have helped on drug prices. They weren't huge wins, but they were steps in the right direction. Before it came to the floor, somebody in the leadership team, I don't know whether it was Pelosi or somebody else, but somebody grabbed it. They added on some Obamacare items and took out the Hyde Amendment protections when they were doing it to guarantee a very partisan vote on the floor. So then it goes over to the Senate. The Senate's never going to take it up. And what could have been helpful and what came out of our committee, both Democrats and Republicans worked on it. What came out of our committee is a bipartisan step in the right direction on drug pricing. Will never see the light of day, and I believe that was political.
Unbelievable. I mean, that's just really sad that we've come to a time in this country where farmers and other people get hurt. They can't benefit from a trade deal that's on the table for political expediency for one party looking 18 months out. That's just sick. I mean, you can't even spin this. I mean, that is just horrific. And but look, they don't care. And until the voters hold them accountable to this, the same thing is going to happen. Look, I get where your position is. I'm frustrated with those that campaigned and said they wouldn't allow this to happen. You know, vote for me. I'm a Democrat. I'm a centrist. I'm going to vote against Pelosi. I'm going to do what's right. You know, I just want middle of the road. I don't like Trump's tweets, but I'm not one of them. I'm not Squad 2.0. You know, I can't get a phone call back from any of these people. I mean, they won't even return a phone call because they don't know what to say, right? Now, here's what Bobby Scott said. I haven't seen the legislation. Well, you haven't seen it because it's not on the floor. See, that's the biggest cop-out ever. And I love Bobby Scott to death. He's my congressman. But, well, I haven't seen it. Well, I haven't seen it because it's not on the floor. That's why you haven't seen it. Then you mentioned, I just got to say one other thing and then get you to comment. You say that they're going to bottle it up. So now what they're doing is they're blaming drug pricing, okay? So they're saying, well, it gives, the USMCA gives a 10-year buy to drug patents, and that's too long. Drug prices are too high. Seriously? Obamacare, which they voted for, I don't know, 75 times? Obamacare has baked in a 12-year patent for drug companies. So actually, USMCA is lower than the 12-year patent that the same Democrats voted for 50 times. It's lowering it, and they're blaming that for not passing it. The hypocrisy is beyond the pale.
Yeah, well, I mean, both parties have been guilty of that over time, but I've never seen anything like this to this degree where you can't get. I mean, these weren't bills that were going to, these drug bills I'm talking about weren't going to be bills that would be, the number one issue in any campaign in 2020. But they didn't want any victory to come out where it looked like the president was having some wins. Now, maybe the president can negotiate with Nancy Pelosi. There have been rumors about that floating around here in D.C. to come up with some drug pricing language. But we had 6 bills 3-4 months ago that were on their way, that would have helped, that got sidetracked by party politics. And not by the people in the committee. I mean, that's what people don't understand. We worked together. We did what the American people want us to do. We came up with bipartisan solutions. And then on the way to the floor, it got hijacked.
By those that are more interested in partisan winning and losing and not just good legislation, which is why you're up there. Right?
Yep.
Unbelievable. All right, let's get to North Carolina 9 yesterday. You got a new member of the House. Dan Bishop from North Carolina. As you read that, you're a pretty astute politician from Salem, right? I've always said this. You really have a good finger and a handle and a pulse of what's going on. By the way, we're with 9th District Republican Congressman Virginia Morgan Griffith. What did you think of that win for the Republican yesterday? And does that give any indication of what's to come?
Well, I think it does, because what you had happen was, of course, there was all these allegations around last November's election, but last November's election was extremely close. And, then there were the allegations that somebody on the Republicans' team had gone out and ballot harvested, which is very similar to what they did in California, except in California it's legal, and in North Carolina it's illegal, so it was wrong. But that election was extremely close. This election was close, but not extremely close. The margin, the percentage margin, was higher, with the Democrats thinking for months, because their candidate had been out there campaigning for 2 years. He had a money advantage in the beginning, and they thought they were going to pick one off. The forces rallied. It did cost some money, but we saw that the percentage of the win was greater than what we had last November, and I think that's a sign that things have moved slightly in our direction in the pro-Trump areas. I'm not going to say that has suddenly changed New York City, but it certainly indicates that some of the folks are coming back, realizing that, you know, these people on the left have just lost their minds. And as you said, I mean, McCready ran as one of these guys who was going to, you know, try to be down the middle and so forth. And I think they're seeing in D.C. that they can say that, but when you're voting for the leadership team, and it's not just Nancy Pelosi, and when you are, you know, working with AOC and company on a daily basis in your caucus meetings, that there's not going to be a whole lot you can do. And if your party has the majority, they're going to stop good things like the USMCA and other good policies from ever making it to the floor. And that's why I think Bishop won and picked up a larger percentage than his predecessor had won in the contested election.
Right. Well, look, that does bode well because you did, and they got a big turnout in rural voters. You represent a rural area, much of it in the 9th District. Would you consider that rural? And so, look, there's a lot of upside for Republicans there in registering new voters, and they did a good job in that in this campaign. So it does bode well. Final question. Trump is losing suburban white women all over the place. I mean, I just look at the poll numbers. You can't spin the thing. You look at Virginia coming up in 2019. You served in the House of Delegates. You were in leadership there. Chet Peterson said if you stayed, you would have been the speaker. So you look at what's going on right now. I don't see a pathway for Republicans to hold the Senate. They're at big risk in the House. What happens?
Don't know. There's some chances to pick up seats for Republicans. We're going to lose a couple of seats, which we can't afford to lose, but we're going to lose a couple of seats based on the redistricting decisions. But there's also significant opportunities to pick up some seats that we shouldn't have lost 2 years ago. And as a result of that, I can't tell you. I think it's going to be very, very close. But if we pick up a couple of seats, and I think there's an opportunity to pick up as many as 4. Mm-hmm. And this is where the race yesterday has some indicators for us. Some of those folks come home in the rural areas and in the areas on the edges of the suburbs. Mm-hmm. We have a chance to pick up as many as 4 seats. We'll lose a couple, don't get me wrong. The net, at best, is a pickup of 1 or 2 for the Republicans. At worst, it's a loss of 1 or 2, which means I don't know who will be in control after November.
Do you have, off the top of your head, do you know who the 4 seats are you think the GOP could pick up? Off the top of your head?
Yeah, but I don't want to tell the Democrats.
I'll call you offline. How about that? Deal? And then I won't say
I'm on my way to something now, but you can call me later. Yes, sir.
I will do that. All right, Morgan Griffith, thank you very much. Always appreciate the time and the candor. Great to have you with us. We've got to get this UMCA passed, and we've got to get it passed now. People are suffering, and it's going to be a great benefit to so many people in your district specifically. John Fredericks Radio Network just heard from Congressman Morgan Griffith